So we are going to bust a myth and also answer a question and answer segment here. I get this a lot, and I just talked to a gentleman this week. We were talking about all of the what he had to offer on his property as far as bedding, where they were, what he's experienced, some stuff that we've got coming down the road here on a analysis package, and where we're going to start out, what we needed to find out as far as his past experiences, as far as bedding, where things were at, how things were working, how things weren't working. And the topic came up of the swamp, the area that he had. He's got an 80, and about 10 acres of it is a swamp. Now this may not generate to a lot of folks or pertain to a lot of folks down in the southern parts of the country, but here in mid-Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, this rings pretty true as the swamps. Now the myth is, so the question was, what we started talking, and he's like, well, I think I've got all that bedding in there. Is what can we do to enhance it? And I said, well, first of all, we need to make sure that bedding is what it's performing the way it is. And it was, well, the gentleman had said, well, it's been that way for 20 years, and it's a bedding area, and we don't go in there, and that's where all the deer come out of. Well, I hear that a lot. I hear that saying is it's been that way for 20 years, and the swamps is where they bed. And when we got we were talking about this in February, and he just called last week, and he said, Josh, he said, I've got something to apologize for. And I said, well, what was that? And I said, first of all, one thing, you don't have to apologize. But I said, what'd you find? He said, I went in that swamp and I never found a bed, not one. And I said, well, that's why I go back to this a bedding area and what it is and what makes a bedding area so powerful. And I said, a lot of the times what I find is these bedding areas are coined or deemed bedding. And I said, depending on the time of the year, these swamps can be, and it can be great bedding area. But if there's water present in these bedding areas, they're going to be warm season bedding areas. In other words, they're going to be summer bedding. I said that bedding changes drastically going into the winter months. It's just like us. A deer does not want to have cold bedding or have wet feet, let's say, when you're trying to, it's just like us. If you work all during the day and you're out on the farm or whatever the case is, you got wet boots, you want to get rid of them, because that wet foot will lower your body temperature, and nobody wants to be uncomfortable and being wet. And that's the same thing that goes for the deer. And I think we find that a lot of guys just they don't go in, they don't enhance it. So he said, well, one, I think I found where they're bedding. The problem with it is they're on the neighbors. So not only were the problem was he was getting nocturnal deer movement, and we were trying to figure out a game plan to enhance the areas that he had. One, he was hunting on the food plot, so not only were these deer not in the bedding area that he thought they were coming through that area from a distant area. So these deer were moving extremely far, and that's the reason that they weren't. One of the reasons that they weren't getting to the fields. Two is the second issue is he's hunting the food plots. This happened to be ag, not just a small food plot. He was hunting out in the ag fields, and he's mainly a gun hunter, and his family does a little bow hunting, but mainly setting it up for being successful. And it was kind of it's a deal where they own a couple parcels together, and so it covers some ground. Moral of the story is the bedding isn't what they thought, and so this video is what to do. Now, cedar, if you go into these cedar areas, you're going to find that the bedding, some of these cedars have these knolls that will be up and out of the water, and if you can find one of those that's off the beaten path or set away, that is a great area for buck bedding, because it's maybe surrounded by water. He's got water when he leaves that bed going to feed, and it's secluded. But the thing that I find in these cedar swamps, let's say, we're going to deem swamps into the cedar here for a second. What that is, guys, is these cedar swamps, they cut off all the vegetation. It's thick. It's like white pine. You get in these white pine cedars and these lowland evergreens, and it chokes off anything in there. Not only do you have a high water table, so anything that is salvageable or maintainable, let's say, as far as a hardwood regeneration, doesn't grow because it's in water. It's too wet. Now, hopefully, there's some things that you can do. A lot of guys do not like to go into these cedar swamps, and make this bedding, give this bedding a jump start. What you can do is you can go in and cut some of those cedars out and make these pockets. Now you make these pockets, you're making bedding. What I do is I still encompass or incorporate my hub style bedding area, so you're forcing these deer, or you're aiding in the funnel of these deer to head out in these right areas. And that's where, like this gentleman here, what we're going to end up doing is this ag is going to be the last destination after they go through his food plot. So we're implementing a food plot, and we're putting these does out towards the feed, and we're putting him actually between, back behind the doe bedding areas, like we always try to design, and between the doe bedding areas and the buck bed. So it's going to be a totally different setup for him. But as we're laying it out, and as soon as all the lockdown here happens, this is the first week of May project that I've got coming to finish with him, and it's going to be a killer. It's absolutely killer farm. And it's just one of those deals that I see a lot of, and it's sad that there's nobody has ever reached out and helped folks like these guys and explained why they've been just outside the box, just a step away from a successful farm, and they've had it the entire time. And that to me is it's a bummer. It's a lot of, you're in the stand, and he's shot some good bucks that have made it to that egg fields chasing does, or got bumped from the neighbors and ended up there. But it's not a continuous majority. Like we always talk, you don't want to be just lucky every now and then. You want to be the property in the area that you are harvesting the majority of these mature bucks. That's the goal. And the object is, if you can get the neighbors in, it's never a bad thing. Add all this in, it just adds fuel to your fire, and you can maintain, like we say, these movements a little bit more. But as far as the bedding areas, go in, open these areas up, get them pockets of cedar out, white pine down, get them out of there, get it on the ground, use the debris if you can, in aid of these. Like I said, use my hub style design here. That's kind of the theory. You have to create food inside of these areas, and these swamps are perfect examples. Now, one of the other things, obviously, you take these cedars down, and you take these white pines down in these, and you find these areas that are out of the water, because most of them, unless they're standing water the entire year, most of these cedar swamps do have areas that are high and dry. Now, if it's a situation where it's too wet to get to, and you have to forage to it, then that's a little bit different. I don't recommend going out just because of that, because it's you never know how wet the year is, and that changes your bedding areas. The object is, in this situation, is to have it so it's sustainable, it's maintainable, and you can count on it being that same bedding area year after year, instead of taking a chance of waiting and designing your entire property, and one spring is wetter than the next, and what happens is that pushes the deer back behind. This one right here is a perfect example. All wet out here in the front, the property that we're on today, all wet out here in the front. You can see the white pines in the back, and what has happened is these deer from the years used to bed right on the edge here. Now this is this year, and a lot of years, not too far in the past, it's pushed these deer out. What this has done is this whole piece here has just been maintained and unmaintained, and now last couple years ago that we've got that switchgrass in there now. But this here is a perfect example that the deer are now bedded back up in the hardwoods now in a couple pockets that are thicker, and they're not here, and that makes now all the hunting out here that used to be close, it's by the time that they get there and out into these destination feed locations, it's way too late. So take that into consideration. So to answer this is a question and answer, and we got a long ways on this project yet. to go. But that's one of the biggest hurdles that we jumped, is just beating that element of always thinking that the swamps, if it's a swamp, there got to be bedding in there. And sometimes they are, but a lot of times they're not, is because, one, you just assume they are and never been in there and haven't spent enough time in there to figure out if it's only buck bedding or where the does are at. Now you might be in the area out in the ag fields. You might be on the back side of the buck bedding areas. So and then your neighbors have higher and drier area, and the does are actually bedded towards their agricultural or their destination feed locations, not yours. And the whole time that you're hunting on the backside of the bucks, not in between. You have to get into these areas, that late season scouting and the postseason scouting. Get into there and find out what you got. If not, perfect thing to do is to knock these pockets out, get some of this regeneration going, or take the tip that I've got and to go and get some of this if it's not growing in there already, which a lot of these places are where we're at here in Michigan, Wisconsin, going any further. Like I said, a lot of it is the red osier dogwood is growing, and it's candy is what it is to these whitetails. Now you can transplant it. There's a lot of these right-of-ways that they just mow it over. If you see with these right-of-ways being done, you got somebody that doesn't use it. It's just growing wild out in front of their farm or whatever the case is. Get a hold of them. Go take the truck and the nippers and go in and collect a whole bunch of it and get it in those areas that you create in these cedar swamps. All of this high and dry stuff, you put that food in there. Now you've got high and dry bedding and you've got food. Then you know that your areas are sustainable. But you go in there in March, June, July, and it's too wet and there's no areas in there, I wouldn't bank on it for the fall hunting season. Is because if it's wet now, like we said, it's cooler. They're going to be in there. It's like an AC working a hot day on the farm or at work and getting home and walking into the AC. That's great, but you don't want that situation when the temperatures drop in the fall. So take that in, look at that, see if that's the issue that you've got. Go in there, find out now what the deal is. I'd rather you blow the deer out now, obviously, in the going into the spring, the summer months here, figuring it out. And if that's not the case, then you have to bring your bedding out here on this side of it, let's say closer to the destination feed locations, because now like this customer here that we have, this client here that we have, we found this situation out years ago for him. And I was actually going by the farm today on the way home from town, so I thought I'd stop. Perfect situation. He thought the same thing. He thought these deer were in here and they weren't. And it's totally created chaos on one of this farm. And now that we've showed this to him, now we've actually got deer bedding out here on this side of the swamp because it's way too wet in there. Now they're closer to his destination feed location, so we got does bedding just off the feed, and now he's in the driver's seat. So something that we see a lot of, I see a lot of, and something that I strive to fix. And just because it's a cedar swamp, don't get caught in the trap of believing it's bedding. Thanks, guys.